markets, finance, scandal. Find out what's really happening to the global economy with Max Kaiser for a no-holds-barred look at the global financial headlines. Tune in to Kaiser Report on RT.
I would rather ask questions to people in positions of power instead of speaking on their behalf. And that's why you can find my show, Larry King Now, right here on RT. Question more.
Right from the scene. First-rate news and eye-gripping pictures. On our reporters' Twitter and Instagram. To be in the know, follow us online.
Welcome back to Worlds Apart, where we are discussing whistleblowers and the rule of law with Irish MP Clare Daly. Deputy Daly, just a few weeks ago, we learned that this unbreakable and unquestionable bond between America, Britain, and to some extent the rest of Europe doesn't really stop Americans from spying on their closest allies. And we've heard some European politicians expressing their displeasure or dismay, but I don't think it's enough to make Europeans really angry. And my question to you, what do you think needs to happen for Europeans and the Brits to actually start behaving like equal partners rather than blind followers of the American partners? What needs to happen? What bigger scandal we can have to actually make them angry?
Well, you would think, wouldn't you? But it probably is indicative of the fact that a lot of the governments throughout Europe are probably just as bad and would probably like to engage in that surveillance on their own people as well. I think, you know, when you think about the scale of this scandal and what a sacrifice Edward Snowden has made by putting it in the public domain, I think it does enrage people. The problem is it's the people in power who are not enraged, because probably they agree with much the same policies that the US states are engaged in, and they would like to be doing similar things themselves.
Mm-hmm. And I think some of them are actually doing. Just recently it was revealed that Britain and France may be engaged in similar surveillance programs. So it may be not such a big a deal after all.
Probably it is the scale of it, and it is ordinary people who should be and are justifiably outraged about this. But I think it is, it certainly has caused problems with Europe, there's no doubt. You know, the idea that the US are spying on the EU in a war against terror, that they're on the European Parliament headquarters, no, it's far more to do with trade and trying to get economic advantage, and you would think that they would be angered. But then we had France giving out about this, but then they divert the Bolivian aircraft with the Bolivian president on it, in, you know, bending the knee to the United States again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually wanted to ask you a question about that, but before we go there, you called Edward Snowden an international hero, but it looks like very few countries, including the ones whose policies are not aligned with the United States, seize upon every legalistic technicality to avoid even considering his application. Why do you think that is?
I think it is fear, and it is trying to appease US imperialism. And I do think, in fairness, obviously he is in Russia at the moment, but I think that Russia should say, give him the right to stay there. I have put out the call in Ireland that we should welcome him here. To be honest, I wouldn't trust our establishment that he would be safe if he did come here. But I think it is subservience to the United States as still, on the world stage, the dominant imperialist power.
Many of these policymakers and politicians, when explaining why they don't want to consider Edward Snowden's application, refer to the rule of law. And of course, the rule of law is an important concept, but laws, international laws, have been stretched and circumvented in the past to launch wars or to authorize these massive surveillance programs. Do you think the extraordinary nature of Snowden's revelations warrants a more flexible approach to asylum procedures?
I have argued that position in our Parliament. I think you are totally correct. I mean, this morning we learnt that the United States have sent a provisional arrest warrant to the Irish authorities because they believed that Edward Snowden was going to travel on a commercial flight from Moscow to Cuba, which would be stopping in Shannon. They never go on to an aircraft when the United States carriers land people, where there were people suspected being trafficked on rendition flights. Did they ask them about passports? The Irish government turned a blind eye on that. This is an extraordinary situation. Of course, they could bend the rules. There was an example in 2002 when some Palestinians needed to be taken out of Israel following a siege in a church in Bethlehem. The EU gave asylum and protected and brought those people to 4 different European countries. I made the joke in Parliament, but it isn't really that funny, that in Ireland we gave passports to English footballers so they could apply and play for the Irish football team in the European Championships because we thought it was important enough. Surely Edward Snowden's life is a bit more important than that. So of course the rules, they always bend them when they want, and they could do it here.
And I think this recent example of France and Italy, Spain, Portugal colluding to divert the plane of the Bolivian president and also search it without any warrant is another example of how international law and all sorts of procedures could be stretched or ignored, because the Bolivian president himself said that that was a gross violation of international law. Now, as far as I understand, at this point, there are no international warrants, no Interpol warrant to arrest Edward Snowden, and neither could there be one because Interpol doesn't issue warrants for political crimes or suspected political crimes, and espionage is considered to be one. So if there's no legal ground for these countries to try to apprehend Edward Snowden, why do you think they're showing so much eagerness to assist the United States in their efforts to arrest him?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's 2 things. We have had reports of provisional arrest warrants being issued, but I don't think there is a legal basis for any action against him at the moment. So the only explanation is that the establishments in practically every country in the world are afraid of offending the United States government. Now, they have a reason to be fearful because the United States are using its weight, its economic weight in some instances, and its military weight in others to intimidate those countries. I think we saw that graphically with Ecuador threatening to take their trade preferences from them if they were to give him asylum, and other countries are afraid to give him any asylum. Now, I don't think that's good enough, but that is the only explanation as to why it is happening.
Now, given what you just said, the associated threats with helping Mr. Snowden, what do you think may actually happen to him? Because he has already explored his options with Russia and China. Some of the European countries like Ireland and other more neutral European countries also turned him down. What do you think may happen to him after all? I mean, do you think he will be ultimately forced to surrender to the US authorities?
I really hope not, but it must be just an incredibly unimaginable situation to be in at the moment when he can really trust nobody. He doesn't know and has no assistance from any corner of the world, unlikely to see his family again. It is unbelievable. I think there should be an international outcry from all human rights organisations, from all decent people. A majority of American people believe that what he did was for the best reasons and was true patriotism. If if you like, and anybody interested in civil rights and democracy should be shouting up in the hope that at least one country or one place would give him asylum. But I think I would be seriously worried, and I think the pressure needs to be stepped up in that regard. We are putting out that call in Ireland, but I would think and hope that, seeing as he is in Moscow, that, you know, he's probably safer there at the moment than he would be anywhere else. And I think he should be allowed to stay there, because I don't think the Americans will invade Moscow to get him.
Well, hopefully not. Otherwise, they will be met with quite a forceful response. But if you think about that, life imprisonment in a penitentiary is not so much worse than being indefinitely confined to some capsule hotel at an airport terminal. Obviously, as you said, in Moscow he doesn't face a threat of execution, but it is a very difficult ordeal, both on psychological, economic, physical grounds. So my concern is that sooner or later he may be simply driven to that despair, and sooner or later he may decide that he just wants to put an end to it all.
For sure. What human being could deal with that for any length of time? It is unimaginable torture nearly at this stage, I would imagine, in terms of his mentality. So that cannot continue indefinitely, and at some point either something will have to break. Either enough pressure is built up so that some country does agree to take him and a means are found for getting him there, or alternatively then he will have to hand himself over to the authorities. But when he sees what has happened to Bradley Manning and other whistleblowers, he knows that he is going, to a very serious, unpleasant place where persecution and torture await him. So you can imagine the mental stress that he is currently under, which puts the duty on all of us around the world to be shouting a bit louder for an intervention to be had from somewhere.
And if he is forced to surrender, wouldn't that be a very hard blow to any hope of changing the current system? Because you already mentioned the sacrifices that he had to go through, and it looks like he did it for the common good, but the world doesn't really seem to appreciate his sacrifices. So anyone who might have been inspired initially by his action, I guess would now be deterred from even thinking about making this world a bit more transparent, a bit more fair.
I think that's what the establishment hope would be the outcome, but I do think many people really admire what he's done, but they're probably a little bit daunted. They're a little bit afraid at how powerful the establishment is on a global scale. But the lesson they should be taking from it really is that one gesture or one person can make an enormous difference. And, there are millions, tens of millions of like-minded people all around the globe. We just have to organise ourselves and stand up a little bit more than we have been. And that's the best contribution anybody can make to support the stand that he has made.
And that leads me to my final question. You also seem to be the one who is trying to change the world, not in a pompous way, but, through your work in the parliament, through your work in the community, also by being vocal about the injustices. But do you feel like your efforts are really paying off? Because it seems like the more the system is challenged, the more entrenched it becomes.
Yes, that is certainly the case, and there is no doubt that the suffering being experienced by people globally is increasing. But you can only draw two conclusions. You walk off the field and give up the game, or you keep fighting. And I think that we are never beaten unless we stop fighting, and we don't intend to do that.
Well, Deputy Daly, that's a very uplifting note to finish the program. Please join us again, same place, same time, here on Worlds Apart.